Bounty has departed New London, next port of call St. Petersburg, Florida. Bounty will be sailing due east out to sea before heading south to avoid the brunt of Hurricane Sandy.
Go.
36031, we're transitioning forward to the other raft for the additional 3 POB. Do you still have a marker on the PIW?
This will be a tough voyage for Bounty. Bounty is approximately 100 miles offshore, speed 8.8 knots, on a course south by west.
You're good. Roger, swimmer's going into the water. Water, left 5.
You got about 20 seconds. You got plenty of time.
Swimmer's away.
Bounty update. Bounty is currently 250 miles due east of the Chesapeake Bay on a southwest course at 6.8 knots. The captain reports that Bounty should be encountering weather from the storm sometime this evening.
Swimmer's in the water. Swimmer's away.
You've got a nice little rain shower. We're going to be sitting in here for a little while.
Cease commands. Bring it back.
Sector North Carolina, disregard rest.
Riding the storm out day 2. I'm sure that the Bounty's crew would be overwhelmed by all the prayers and best wishes that have been given. Rest assured that the Bounty is safe and in very capable hands. Bounty's current voyage is a calculated decision, not at all irresponsible or with a lack of foresight, as some have suggested. The fact of the matter is, a ship is safer at sea than in port. The Tall Ship Bounty. Commissioned by MGM Studios and built in 1960 by Smith & Rewland Shipyard of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, was actually an enlarged replica of the HMS Bounty, also known as the HMAV, or Her Majesty's Armed Vessel Bounty, that 18th century British Admiralty sailing ship famed for the Mutiny of 1789. Both the original and replica being fully rigged sailing ships with 3 primary masts. But in researching this vessel's backstory and then discussing it with Mike Brady, the legend over at Oceanliner Designs, we both realized his channel would be well suited to delve into the mutiny, the 18th century feel, and just overall immersion needed to really get to know why the replica HMS Bounty exists in the first place.
In the first of this 2-video collaboration, we were introduced to the 2 bounties. We looked at the fascinating story behind both ships and their design and construction. The first, an 18th century warship, and the second, a replica made for Hollywood in the 1960s. Both were met with disaster. In 1787, HMS Bounty was on a special mission when a mutiny saw her captain and his loyal followers cast adrift in the ocean. Nobody thought they could survive, but they did, through a feat of navigation, and the mutineers were hunted down to the ends of the earth. The story became legend. 173 years later, Hollywood sought to bring the story to life, and a replica was commissioned. The film received mixed reviews and performed poorly at the box office, but arguably its greatest legacy was the replica ship, which became a favourite museum vessel. In 2012, the Bounty replica was moored directly in the path of a gathering storm, one of the most ferocious hurricanes to hit the US East Coast. She sailed out into the open ocean and into the arms of fate, because she would not make it to a safe port again.
Primary sources for this video are the U.S. Coast Guard's investigative report, the NTSB's Marine Accident Brief, along with the Replica Bounty Organization's archived website. With a deck length of 120 feet, a width or beam of 32 feet, a draft of about 13 feet, and gross tonnage of 412, the Replica Bounty had approximately 10,000 square feet of functional sail area, but was also powered by twin John Deere 375 horsepower diesel engines, each to their own screw. This mechanical propulsion was in addition to the ability to use the wind as propulsion, but the engines weren't exactly backups per se, as they'd be put to use regularly. One of the primary propulsion systems on this channel, Brick and Mortar, is the incredible support on Patreon. Our videos that contain invaluable safety lessons learned or memorialized victims are off limits to sponsors, and since our patrons play such a crucial role in keeping the ship afloat, members on Patreon get to enjoy listenable, ad-free podcast versions of every video. Listen with your device locked on the go. Early access, ad-free versions of every video. Access to the one-of-a-kind brick-and-mortar ambient music catalog that I remix personally, and much more. Check it out at patreon.com/brickandmortar. From the Bounty Organization's website, tallshipbounty.org. After filming and a worldwide promotional tour, MGM had the ship berthed in St. Petersburg, Florida, as a permanent tourist attraction, where she stayed until the mid-1980s. In '86, Ted Turner acquired the MGM film library and the Bounty with it. He used it to promote his enterprises and film Treasure Island with Charlton Heston in '89. In 1993, Turner donated the ship to the Fall River Chamber Foundation, which then established the Tall Ship Bounty Foundation to operate the ship as an educational venture. The vessel would change hands from the Tall Ship Bounty Foundation to the HMS Bounty Foundation in 2001. And from the NTSB's report, in '93, Turner Broadcasting donated the vessel to the city of Fall River, Massachusetts, where it sat in disrepair until 2001, when the current management company, HMS Bounty Organization LLC, bought the vessel. Captain Walbridge. It was around 1995 that Captain Walbridge took over as the vessel's master. According to tallshipbounty.org, the captain was a St. Petersburg native who'd been active in the world of sailing since the age of 18. He'd owned a 38-foot schooner by the time he was in his mid-20s and worked as a houseboat mechanic after that. He'd acquire his 50-ton captain's license by age 28. Then, as captain of a local schooner in Apalachicola, Florida, he went on to conduct day sail programs and crew training programs where he'd earned his 100-ton license. He'd worked to create sail training programs for Boy Scouts, local orphanages, an alternative school, and had previously taught adult education courses in basic vessel navigation. After becoming second and first mate aboard HMS Rose in 1993, another Lunenburg-made replica tall ship, he'd go on to acquire his 500-ton captain's license, and by '95, obtained his 1,600-ton license. Quote, enter HMS Bounty. It was a labor of love from the beginning, and Walbridge never looked back. Keeping Bounty afloat has been a full-time occupation for many years. If it weren't for his efforts, the ship would have sunk at the dock in Fall River, Massachusetts. During these financially difficult years, he organized programs at the local orphanage, taking 4 to 6 young adults on as part of his crew. He also worked with an Ohio-based alternative school to give children an opportunity to find their love of the sea in a new environment. Maintaining and especially operating a ship like this is very costly and relies heavily on the generosity of donors. HMS Bounty Organization LLC, the foundation that purchased the vessel in '01, saw to it, still under the command of Captain Walbridge, that the vessel be restored to its former glory. From tallshipbounty.org. The current Bounty's initial refit came soon after HMS Bounty Organization purchased her in February of '01. From her former home in Fall River, the owner, along with the captain, had what became the daunting task of finding a shipyard with the size and resources to do the necessary repairs. The two worked out an arrangement with Samples Shipyard in Maine. However, getting Bounty there from Fall River turned out to be an adventure in and of itself. The Friday prior to its scheduled departure for Maine, the ship was being kept afloat by a cadre of pumps. Going from bad to much worse, that night there was an accident in Fall River that brought down an electrical pole, resulting in a power outage. Like a beating heart that just gives out, the pumps keeping Bounty alive fell silent. The man hired to watch the boat called me at about 10 p.m. frantic, explaining we'd lost power and Bounty was sinking. Needless to say, we had to move fast. Fast thinking and quick action saved her from going down. We were able to get some big emergency pumps on board to keep up with the leaking, said the owner. But it was very close. Bounty had almost 6 feet of water in her and was within inches of going down. The local Coast Guard unit, police, and fire department all became aware of the situation and forbid them to leave, presumably under their own power. So they'd arrange a vessel to tow the Bounty along with, quote, 6 huge diesel pumps with enough pumping capacity to handle 250,000 gallons an hour. Once underway, though, they ended up only using one pump and only at idle speed. The vessel had, quote, swelled up once in motion, and the leaking mostly subsided. The predicted 60-hour-long tow to Boothbay Harbor in Maine took only about 40 hours. They'd intended to finish some restoration work that was started on it previously back in Fall River, but, quote, once they pulled it out of the water, it was painfully clear that practically everything from the waterline on down had to be replaced. The year-long process in Drydock would see the Bounty receive, quote, virtually all new frames, new running gear, new engines, new drives, new props, and new fuel and water tanks. After all this, the square-rigged sailing ship was, according to the organization, ready for adventures once again. The owners, captain, and crew, returning the Bounty reportedly to St. Petersburg, Florida, saw to it that the vessel set out on the organization's mission of square-rigged sailing preservation, teamwork training, sail-away summer camp programs, and dockside educational programs for children. And in this presumably seaworthy condition, the Bounty was once again available for charters, tours, and the occasional movie role as well. In 2004, the Bounty had a starring role in the opening scenes of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Then in 2005, Disney paid for another massive refit, this time to feature in Pirates of the Caribbean 2: Dead Man's Chest. The ship would receive upgraded riggings along with new fittings and paintwork to resemble a, quote, genuine 18th century British vessel, portraying the merchant cargo vessel Edinburgh Trader, the Pirates movie releasing in July of 2006. After more restoration work during the summer of 2007, the Bounty reportedly set out for the organization's ultimate, long-planned world tour, transiting the Atlantic to visit the UK, then around South Africa to head east towards French Polynesia, where they'd end up stopping at the legendary Pitcairn Islands, meeting those descendants of the original HMS Bounty. Soon after another UK tour in 2009, HMS Bounty organization decided to put the vessel up for sale. A posting on a yacht brokerage site going up as early as March of 2010 with a list price of $4.9 million. Important to note, a later version of this posting shows a list price of $4.6 million and states, quote, she can be licensed for 12 passengers underway, with the word can carrying a lot of weight in that sentence, as the vessel's owner and operator struggled for years to acquire the license needed to actually carry passengers. From the NTSB, the U.S. Coast Guard certificated the Bounty as a moored attraction vessel. As such, when the vessel was secured alongside a berth, visitors could tour it for a fee, but the vessel was not permitted to carry passengers underway. Before granting permission for tours at any U.S. port, local Coast Guard authorities would first inspect the vessel to ensure that it was fit to receive visitors. This included identifying and correcting possible safety hazards and ensuring suitable means of embarking and disembarking, life-saving and firefighting equipment, means of exit from below-deck spaces, proper lighting, and so on. When the Bounty transited between event sites with just the crew on board, the vessel was considered simply a recreational/private vessel, subject to very few requirements of the Coast Guard's regulations found in 33 CFR Parts 175 and 183. This is all in addition to a handful of other related Coast Guard items that seemed in conflict with the vessel's stated goals. For example, quote, Bounty was not certificated or permitted to carry passengers for hire while underway as a passenger vessel, as defined in 46 USC Section 2101, Item 22, and Bounty was not certificated or permitted to act as a sailing school vessel, as defined in 46 USC Section 2101, Item 30, and continued from the NTSB. As recently as 2012, the vessel organization had sought approval for the Bounty to carry passengers underway. The American Bureau of Shipping, a non-governmental organization that establishes and maintains standards for shipbuilding and operation, considered the vessel organization's request and identified several modifications that would be required. Some of the modifications included addressing watertight bulkheads found with open penetrations and fitting the fuel tank vent with a flame screen or a means of automatic closing. However, because of financial constraints, the vessel organization did not pursue the matter and the modifications were never made. After attending the July 2012 Tall Ships Festival in Halifax, Nova Scotia, the Bounty and crew would sail to Belfast, Maine. While in port at Belfast, the captain spoke rather candidly to an interviewer about his thoughts on stormy seas.
Have you run into stormy seas?
We run into stormy seas. We chase hurricanes.
All right. What's it like when you're chasing a hurricane?
You try and get up as close to the eye of it as you can, and you stay down in the southeast quadrant, and when it stops, you stop. You don't want to get in front of it. You want to stay behind it, but you'll also get a good ride out of the hurricane.
Boothbay Harbor, Maine, September 17th, 2012. Another shipyard period, another round of repairs and maintenance. They'd move the crew quarters forward, install new fuel tanks and reposition water tanks, perform maintenance and repairs on the hull, like driving fibrous material into the seams between the wooden boards to make them watertight. At this time, according to the NTSB, during the shipyard period, the vessel organization hired a new employee, recommended by the chief mate, to work as the vessel's engineer. The Bounty was not required to have a licensed engineer or engineer of any kind on board. While there, he conducted the majority of the plumbing work for the newly positioned fuel and water tanks, and, to the extent possible, while the vessel was dry docked, tried to familiarize himself with the engine room equipment. This employee had no professional maritime engineering experience, but stated that he had worked with and maintained tractors, backhoes, and other machinery for more than 30 years. Overall, in terms of experience, 10 of the Bounty's 15 crew members had worked less than 6 months on board the vessel. 9 of them had never worked on board any tall ship other than the Bounty. Only the captain and 4 crew members had more than 2 years' experience on board tall ships. Boothbay shipyard workers provided demonstrations and also assisted with a few challenging tasks. They stated some of the crew members may not initially have set the seams hard enough, and that the yard workers alerted the crew members to this. Overall, the shipyard workers stated that the reseaming work was adequately performed. They did, however, question the seam compounds that the captain had supplied, stating none of the sealants were recommended for water immersion and marine environments. In addition, during the shipyard period, several areas of the wooden hull were found to have rotted out, and the shipyard project manager documented them through photos and samples. The crew already knew about some of the rot, but other areas were also found and brought to the captain's attention. When the project manager asked the captain how this rot was to be addressed, the captain instructed his crew to apply paint to the rotted areas, and that because of time and money constraints, repairs had to wait until the next shipyard period a year later. New London, Connecticut, Thursday, October 25th, 2012. With the Bounty still up for sale, the vessel's brief visit to the New London and Groton ports meant that, in addition to what was an enjoyable exchange of vessel tours with nuclear submarine USS Mississippi, the Bounty would also host potential buyers while in port. When this concluded, their next port of call was St. Petersburg, where they were expected to return to the St. Petersburg Pier for dockside tours on November 10, with transit time expected to take roughly 10 days at an average speed of about 6 knots. However, once the events concluded, still on Thursday, October 25th, the day they'd intended to leave out, a 500-mile-wide obstacle was forecast to place itself firmly between the old wooden sailing ship and their destination. From the NTSB, Tropical Weather System Sandy, which had been gaining strength in the Caribbean, reached hurricane strength on Wednesday, October 24th, the day before the Bounty was to put to sea. Warnings were issued all along the U.S. East Coast, with major population centers taking unprecedented precautions. The majority of the weather forecast models agreed that the hurricane would stay offshore to as far north as Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, and would then turn west and make landfall anywhere between the Delmarva Peninsula to the south and New York Harbor to the north. Making matters worse was that another weather system, a nor'easter, was later to develop off the U.S. East Coast. The nor'easter would combine with Hurricane Sandy and increase its intensity. Newscasters and weather authorities dubbed the powerful combination of hurricane and nor'easter Superstorm Sandy. The captain did call a meeting at about 5 p.m. Thursday evening with the Bounty's crew, roughly an hour before departure. The meeting was to lay out his plans to still sail to St. Petersburg, regardless of the weather forecast. The crew totaled 16 personnel, down from the Bounty's typical underway complement of 20 to 25. In addition to the captain with his 25 years sea time and 17 seasons aboard Bounty, the crew consisted of 6 deckhands with professional sea time ranging from 4 months to 4 years, 3 ABs with sea time ranging from 2 years to 7 years, a bosun and a cook, both with 3 years sea experience, the brand new chief engineer with only 14 days experience, the third mate with 5 years experience, second mate with 12, and chief mate with 15. During his meeting with the crew, the captain, quote, said that the vessel's exact course would depend on the hurricane's path as the storm moved north along the coast, but that his intention was to take the Bounty southeast, well out to sea, and let the hurricane pass southwest of the vessel. He spoke of his confidence in the Bounty's ability to handle rough weather, and that by getting close to the eye, sailors could use hurricane winds to their advantage. He told the crew members that if they felt uncomfortable with sailing as scheduled, they were free to leave and to rejoin the vessel later. He said that no one would think any less of them if they opted out of this transit, which was sure to encounter rough weather. The crew members would, however, have to pay for their own transportation to Florida if they did not travel on board the vessel. Moreover, they knew that the vessel already had limited crew, so if any of the current 15 stayed ashore, the remaining crew would have an increased workload. The crew members admired and respected the captain, and the camaraderie among the crew was substantial. Therefore, none of the crew members chose to leave. About an hour later at 6 p.m., Thursday, October 25th, the Bounty departed New London. From the U.S. Coast Guard, practically every vessel in the Atlantic chose to either tie up or run from Hurricane Sandy. The Bounty would make its way on a southeasterly course. With the engines running harder than usual and added wind power, they were initially making 9 to 10 knots. Throughout the process, the HMS Bounty Organization Facebook page would post what seemed like real-time updates from the journey, with the occasional photo and position data included. Initially, what appeared to be Thursday evening via Facebook status, as they departed New London, quote, Bounty has departed New London, Connecticut. Next port of call, St. Petersburg, Florida. Bounty will be sailing due east out to sea before heading south to avoid the brunt of Hurricane Sandy. In addition, though, the captain was also busy sending emails himself on their status to colleagues at the Bounty Organization and also to a friend. At about 9 a.m. Friday, October 26th, quote, Good morning, miss. You missed an awesome sub-tour. We are headed south by east, waiting to see what the storm wants to do. I'm guessing it wants to come ashore, New Jersey/New York City. We are running, trying to stay on the east side of it, bad side of it until we get some sea room. If we guess wrong, we can run towards Newfoundland. If it turns and wants to tangle with us, that means it is pretty far offshore, and we can turn and go down the west side of it. I need to be sure it is well offshore before we can take advantage of the good weather for us. Right now, I do not want to get between a hurricane and a hard spot. If you can send us updated track info, where it is projected to, that would be great. We know where it is. I have to guess, along with the weatherman, where it is going. Keep you updated. His next email after that, as follows. Looks like I might be able to tell you how far one can drift in a hurricane. Sandy looks like a mean one. Right now we are on a converging course. I am actually headed to the dangerous side of it, hoping like a deer if I am at it, it won't be there when I get there. There is no room to run down the west side of it, but if it comes out to play, then that will mean there is room on the west side. At times like this, I think about the sailors 200 years ago. There are no signs in the sky, barometer is steady, winds are light. I always watch knowing there is a storm for the first telltale signs. Right now there are none except the electronic weather facts. Got an awesome tour of SSN Mississippi, U.S. newest nuclear submarine, quite a boat. When we heave to, I will keep you posted. And then later that same day via Facebook status. This will be a tough voyage for Bounty. Here is Bounty's current position and the weather front Hurricane Sandy that is approaching. Bounty is approximately 100 miles offshore, speed 8.6 knots, on a course south by west. The captain's comments about hurricanes, as seemingly flippant as they were, weren't completely unfounded, even if downright dangerous and outdated. According to the NTSB, what he was likely referring to was a hurricane's navigable semicircle, quote, "In the northern hemisphere, hurricanes rotate in a counterclockwise direction, and the winds on the right side of the storm's travel direction are typically stronger. This is because the right side is subjected to the circulation winds and the hurricane's travel speed. Therefore, mariners sometimes refer to the left side of a hurricane's travel direction as the navigable semicircle." And from the U.S. Coast Guard regarding this phenomenon, "If you are in open ocean and complete avoidance is no longer an option, the only choice is to attempt to avoid the center of the storm, particularly the right front quadrant or dangerous semicircle if possible. The dangerous semicircle is the right front side of the storm as it moves forward. The less dangerous, or navigable semicircle, is the left side of the storm as it moves forward. The techniques of Buys-Ballott's law is the method mariners use to identify the position of a low-pressure center and navigate clear of it. These techniques have been used by mariners for well over 100 years and require no equipment. A barometer will aid the mariner in making more precise evaluations of the storm's position in relation to the vessel. But Bounty had detailed information on the position of the storm from several different sources." And the NTSB concludes with the following clarification. "Being near a hurricane on any side is dangerous, as the winds are strong on all sides. In addition, hurricanes can be unpredictable, including spawning tornadoes." Important to note, according to the Coast Guard, no emergency drills of any kind were conducted prior to departure or during the voyage. In addition, one of the deckhands texted a friend stating, quote, "Right now short-handed, and with only 3 people on each watch, we are all doing 2 jobs at once." From the NTSB, late on Friday, October 26, the forecast models indicated that Hurricane Sandy would turn toward the west and most likely make landfall on the New Jersey coastline. This prediction should have confirmed to the captain that he could remain to the east and that any vessel movement back towards shore, to the west or southwest, would at this point only increase the vessel's risk of encountering the storm. Also, turning the slow-moving Bounty to the west ahead of the storm would risk pinning the vessel between the hurricane and land. By Saturday morning, October 27th, based on a 5 a.m. National Hurricane Center or NHC advisory, Sandy was downgraded briefly from its 3-day-long hurricane status with the caveat, "Sandy weakens but is expected to remain a large storm with widespread impacts into early next week." Maximum sustained winds decreased to 70 miles per hour. The advisory also stating the storm could regain strength into Sunday. It appears, according to the Coast Guard, the captain made a snap, crucial decision based on this information, even though the storm was still powerful, unpredictable, and relatively early in its life cycle. Another email from the captain, this time at about 9 a.m. Saturday. "Thanks for the update. Because of it, I feel okay about trying to sneak to the west of Sandy. New course 225T. It looks like it will stay offshore enough to let us squeak by. Thanks." This decision was made, presumably based on that 0500 or 5 a.m. advisory, but it appears, without taking into account an updated 0800 advisory just 3 hours later by the NHC that reclassified Sandy back to hurricane status. Sustained winds were measured near 75 miles per hour again, extended up to 100 miles from the center, primarily to the southwest, with storm force winds in a radius up to 450 miles. Again, the storm was unpredictable and in a position where anything could happen, with models predicting a slow turn to make landfall to the northwest. It doesn't appear any information suggested the storm would make an extreme turn to the east, or otherwise dissipate quicker than these storms usually would. With the captain's previous talk, focusing so much on a hurricane's eye, which is surrounded by hundreds of miles of hazardous wind conditions, investigators state, quote, "It is possible that the captain may have focused too narrowly on the position of the storm's eye instead of on Sandy's total expanse. Winds associated with the storm spanned eventually more than 1,000 miles in diameter, and the area into which the Bounty was heading was already under tropical storm warnings, with conditions forecasted to worsen. Still, the captain seemed to believe that he could outrace the storm. Weather conditions would begin to deteriorate as Saturday wore on and Bounty grew closer, with seas greater than 15 feet and winds now reaching upwards of 40 miles per hour. As the wooden sailing ship now made its way southwest, the NTSB states, quote, "The vessel began to feel the effects of the Gulf Stream as well, a powerful ocean current with a strong northeast trajectory. This would have added to the stresses on the hull. The vessel had reportedly always taken on at least some water, or would, quote, make water, as some say in the industry. But that was in normal or slightly rough seas, and they typically manage it with their onboard bilge pumps, the primary two being electric, along with 2 backup hydraulic pumps. However, the conditions on Saturday were beginning to punish the old wooden vessel. The crew was working hard to keep the Bounty sailing as conditions worsened. They ran lifelines, ropes tied off on deck for handhold, to help crew members move about and between decks in the heavy seas. They tended to the electric bilge pumps, which were running non-stop now, and began to hear hissing sounds below decks as waves pounded the hull. Water was finding its way through more and more as the day wore on. From the U.S. Coast Guard. Sometime in the evening, the captain attempted to engage the fixed hydraulic pump to assist with the dewatering effort, but it would not work. He then set up the portable hydraulic pump with a deckhand's assistance. But a deckhand noticed the quick disconnect fittings to set up the pump were corroded and needed to be cleaned before it could be hooked up. The water levels in the bilges were remaining constant and not receding. The vessel had begun flooding. Water was entering the hull from the engine room exhaust trunk on the weather deck, various gaps on the weather deck, and between the seams above the waterline. The water coming in was seen running down the interior of the hull, for example, in the engine room, but due to the ceiling planking, it was difficult to see all of the locations of water intrusion. Earlier that day, the newly hired engineer fell and fractured his right hand. In addition, he and several others had felt seasick, even since they'd first set out from New London, and had difficulty moving about the vessel throughout the ordeal. From the NTSB, the crew had also purchased a gasoline-powered, presumably portable pump on a previous voyage, but never used it nor practiced operating it. The electric pumps had not performed optimally after the Bounty left the main shipyard and during the stay in New London. Crew members had told the captain and said that he had been able to get the electric pumps working normally again, but no one was sure what he had done to accomplish that. Although putting to sea with an approaching hurricane, the captain gave no orders to test run the backup hydraulic pumps or the new gasoline pump to ensure that they were operating properly and that the crew knew how to use them. By 1800 or 6 p.m., Bounty was approximately 488 nautical miles from the hurricane center. An AB whose bunk was below decks, even normal rain had been an issue with his bunk as it would leak down onto his bedding. Encountering Hurricane Sandy meant his bunk and likely others were now, quote, soaking wet. Sunday morning, October 28th. At 0800, the captain held a meeting with the officers, engineer, and bosun, where they discussed the work schedule and assignments for the day. However, weather and sea conditions had deteriorated further, with winds at about 90 knots and seas upwards of 30 feet. The Bounty was now roughly 226 nautical miles from the hurricane center. Many crew members were now seasick and fatigued to the point of exhaustion. Sleep was increasingly difficult due to water soaking their beds through ceiling and floor planks, the pitching and rolling in the storm causing the water to slosh up from below decks via the free surface effect. And now that the hull was being punished so severely, the vessel, quote, sounded like it was grinding together. Some tried to help with the bilge pumps despite their fatigue, while others worked to keep items secure as they came loose in the heavy seas. From the NTSB, the crew was struggling to keep the vessel steady in the onslaught of winds and seas, which were primarily out of the east and northeast. The engineer suffered another bad fall that morning. In the galley, so much water was ingressing that the cook had to cover equipment with plastic sheeting. Midday, While the engineer stopped the port generator to change fuel filters, he started the starboard generator and left the engine room. Upon returning a few minutes later, he discovered that the port main engine had stopped working. He noticed that the sight glass on the port day fuel tank was broken, and this may have facilitated a release of fuel into the bilges. The fuel quickly mixed with the high level of water already there and caused a strong smell of diesel in the cramped engine room. The vessel was legitimately using the wind power, even in the hurricane, but the deadly conditions ripped apart one of the primary sails early in the afternoon. Several crew members, quote, went aloft to try and furl the sail, essentially get it under control and bring it down to be stowed. Soon after, the captain was also injured in a fall, remaining mobile but clearly in pain. By 4 p.m., the engine room was flooded with about 3 feet of water, and it was becoming impossible to keep any of the critical equipment running. The port main engine had stopped entirely by 5 p.m., or 1700, and this, combined with the bilge pump difficulties, flooding, and captain's injuries, prompted the chief mate to recommend that they hail the Coast Guard, which the captain refused. By 6 p.m., crew members up on deck were no longer able to walk upright and had to crawl just to move about. Those who could were working to try and shore up any areas below decks they could find to prevent further water ingress. At about 6:30 p.m., the AB fell while trying to move between decks and severely injured his back, neck, and shoulders. Crew members brought a mattress to comfort him, but he was otherwise incapacitated. The vessel was now roughly 130 miles off the coast of North Carolina. Sandy was ravaging this portion of the Atlantic, slowly becoming the, quote, superstorm she'd become infamous for, and the Bounty was now deep inside, fully engulfed by the raging conditions. Meanwhile, as the ship's situation worsened, the chief mate asked the captain once again to contact the Coast Guard, and, quote, the captain said no. The crew continued to struggle. The water levels continued to rise, reaching about 4 feet in the engine room. By 8 p.m., the captain finally agreed to call the Coast Guard. However, when the chief mate attempted to use the satellite phone in the nav shack, and handheld one the vessel also carried, both attempts failed. The satellite phone and radio in the nav shack were not functional, but he was convinced he'd gotten through to the Coast Guard cutter Eagle, which investigators would later find out did not go through. A call from the Bounty did get through to one of the Bounty organization's onshore personnel. This call relayed the nature of distress, last known position, and souls on board. They were also still emailing back and forth with the captain, for whatever reason. And by 8:45 p.m., Coast Guard Sector North Carolina received their first notification of Bounty's distress via a call from the onshore organization team member. The Coast Guard advised them that, if they're still in contact, to have Bounty initiate their EPIRB, or Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacon. EPIRBs do start automatically if they become submerged, but can also be manually activated. At 8:56 p.m., Sector North Carolina broadcast wide on VHF that the Bounty was in distress in the event any vessels could render assistance. However, there were no Navy or Coast Guard vessels in the area, and an oil tanker potentially 35 miles away did not respond to the Coast Guard's hails, possibly struggling in the storm themselves. By this time, the Bounty was about 147 miles from the hurricane center. The crew members that could continued struggling with the ship's generators and bilge pumps. The portside generator had cut out, and soon after, by 9:30, the starboard generator got wet due to water splashing around below decks, leaving the Bounty on battery backup, emergency electrical power only. The Coast Guard notified the Bounty's representative that a C-130 was launching to make contact overhead and assess the scene. By 9:38 p.m., the Coast Guard station received an email with the full list of Bounty's crew. At 10:15 p.m., the captain sent the following email to the same onshore Bounty personnel. 34-09 North, 74-11 West. We are taking on water. We'll probably need assistance in the morning. Sat phone is not working very good. We have activated the EPIRB. We are not in danger tonight, but if conditions don't improve on the boat, we will be tomorrow. Generator we can only run for a short time. I just found out the filters you got were the wrong filters. Let me know when you have contacted the USCG so we can shut the EPIRB off. The boat is doing great. We can't dewater. The struggling vessel was about 150 miles west and slightly north of the hurricane's eye. By about 10:30 p.m., the second mate and AB managed to get the portside generator back online. From the U.S. Coast Guard, the electric bilge pumps were then running again. However, it was no longer safe to remain in the engine room. The water level in the engine room had gone over waist deep, at about 4 to 5 feet above the sole boards, which were now floating in the engine room and crashing into things. The electrical box was now arcing and sparking and then exploded. The engine room was evacuated. Shortly after the engine room was abandoned, the water's free surface inertia and floating debris knocked down the engine room staircase. The captain sent another email, this time directly to Coast Guard Sector North Carolina. Hi, this is the email address my office gave to me. We are 34-07 north by 74-08, course 130, speed 2.6 knots, 17 people on board. I do not know how long I will be able to receive email. My first guess was that we had until morning before we have to abandon. Seeing the water rise, I am not sure we have that long. We have 2 inflatable life rafts. We have activated our EPIRB. Just before midnight, the bosun said that, quote, the captain appeared to be in pain, had difficulty walking, and that his glasses were crooked and bent. Around this same time, after seeing the captain in this state, the bosun took it upon herself to, quote, lead a work party to gather all necessary life-saving gear, water, and supplies into ditch kits in preparation to abandon. The starboard engine had cut out by then, which was their last source of propulsion. Now adrift and without any dewatering ability, the stricken vessel was completely at the mercy of Hurricane Sandy. The Coast Guard C-130 was soon overhead and in direct communication with the Bounty's crew, but rescue helicopters could not deploy as the storm's conditions were beyond their operational capabilities. Their launch was scheduled for roughly daybreak, in hopes the storm had moved on or otherwise dissipated enough for rescue. The Bounty's crew was distributing emergency gear and making plans to abandon. They'd stay in close communication with the C-130 on overwatch above. It stated the vessel was taking on, quote, 2 feet of water per hour, with 10 feet of water now on board. By 3:30 a.m., everyone on board had donned their immersion suits on the captain's orders. He'd also order everyone to remain on the main deck, and had some crew members also equip over their suits additional life jackets and rigging gear they'd use for going aloft when sailing. 3 crew members equipped those climbing harnesses, which the thought process was to have survivors clip lines together should individuals be caught in the waves outside life rafts. At this time, the captain asked the bosun, what went wrong? At what point did we lose control? He was also somehow still sending emails, and sent another at about 3:41 a.m. to Sector North Carolina. We have lost all dewatering abilities, estimate 6 to 10 hours left. When lose all power, we will lose email. There should be an EPIRB going off. Water is taking on fast. We are in distress. Ship is fine. We can't dewater. Need pumps. Email was possible as the Bounty was still on battery backups, but regarding the need pumps request, the Coast Guard assessed that the situation was beyond the need to plan an air asset delivery of additional dewatering pumps. The Bounty was equipped with 2 25-person life rafts, and by 4 a.m., the chief mate recommended launching them and abandoning while the vessel was still upright. But the captain's plan was to, quote, remain on Bounty until it was no longer safe for them to remain on board. From the U.S. Coast Guard, at 4:26 a.m., Bounty heeled over to her starboard side and buried the bow. The chief mate informed the captain that the foredeck was underwater. The third mate heard the exchange and heard the captain reply, we need to go. However, before the crew could abandon ship, the Bounty rolled to starboard on its beam ends, with her rigging going from vertical to horizontal at the water. All hands were now forced to enter the water, and they attempted to make their way aft, away from the vessel. Before leaving the vessel, the chief mate informed the C-130 crew that they were abandoning ship. What followed was chaos. Bounty did not stay on its beam ends and attempted to right herself. The mast and rigging slammed up and down violently, coming down on the crew. There was no time for the crew to grab the ditch kits that they had prepared. It was still dark, and on-scene weather was 40 to 50 knot winds with 18 to 20 foot seas. Also, water temperatures were about 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of the kits they'd put together with emergency supplies were left on deck as everything happened too fast, and were swept away in the sudden heeling. The crew members that were clipped together using one of the harnesses were suddenly entangled in the now horizontal rigging, being pulled underwater as the masts bobbed up and down violently at the surface. One crew member resorted to removing his immersion suit entirely, which allowed both of them to finally swim free of their entanglement. The chief mate had still been in the nav shack when the vessel heeled over, and had one arm out of his immersion suit in order to operate what short-range comms they did have and communicate with the Coast Guard C-130. He quickly put his arm back in the suit as the vessel heeled over, but was forced back into the nav shack by rushing water. Once he freed himself, he got caught up in rigging on deck, picked up into the air as the vessel tried to right itself, and slammed back down into the water. He freed himself from the vessel but was unable to find a life raft. On the exposed port side, the second mate got his foot caught between spars, and a nearby deckhand asked him, "What do I do?" The second mate told her she had to go, and witnessed her working her way toward the stern when he lost sight of her. The second mate eventually freed himself and got away from the foundering vessel. Important to note, in the maritime world, foundering is used regularly. To founder means to sink, collapse, or fail, or to otherwise fill with water and sink. As the channel moves forward, we'll be getting into these maritime industry terms more often. There'll be terms that might throw some people off at first, so just a heads up. After getting free of the foundering vessel, the second mate came across several crew members struggling to board an inflated life raft, but was unable to get inside. He joined the others who just couldn't get on board, instead hanging on along the outside of it together. Several deckhands were able to get inside, some with the assistance of those on the outside, and this group stayed together awaiting rescue. The crew lost sight of the captain in the confusion, some as the vessel suddenly heeled to starboard, others when being forced to enter the water. 3 MH-60 Jayhawks were launched in total, and the first arrived by 6:41 a.m. Unit CG-6012. Winds at this time were about 57 miles per hour, with 15 to 20 foot seas. 6012 deployed their rescue swimmer and immediately set about hoisting survivors one by one. Jayhawk Unit 6031 arrived shortly after and did the same. As the first two helo crews were busy hoisting, Jayhawk Unit 6043 arrived on scene and set about getting as close to the foundering wooden vessel as possible. While hovering within about 40 yards, in addition to visual searches, the crew would use their infrared sensor system to check for heat signatures of anyone caught in the rigging. While they did spot empty immersion suits tangled within, there were no heat signatures to indicate that anyone was still tangled in the stricken vessel. This was also when these two extremely impactful photos were taken of the historic replica HMS Bounty awash in the seas. After hoisting survivors and delivering them safely to Air Station Elizabeth City, 14 of the 16 had been rescued. They'd suffered various injuries like cuts, bumps, bruises, separated joints, or broken bones. The search continued on and around the scene, and later that afternoon, by 4:38 p.m., one of the two missing was discovered about 8 miles southeast of the wreckage. Wearing an immersion suit and unresponsive, it was that deckhand the second mate lost sight of just before he freed his foot from the portside spars. The helo crew performed CPR as they rushed toward the air station. CPR continued as she was transported from the helipad to a local hospital, where, at 7 p.m., the deckhand was pronounced deceased. The Bounty was sighted one last time at 7:20 p.m. by a Coast Guard cutter about 13 nautical miles southeast from the initial scene. The vessel, lying on its side, was awash in the sea when spotted, and assumed to have sunk soon after. The captain remained unaccounted for, and the search continued. After 4 days, 22 search patterns, scouring 10,000 square miles, at about 8 p.m. Thursday, November 1st, the captain was presumed deceased. This time we'll be reading from the Coast Guard's lengthy conclusions and recommendations. In previous videos, we'd most often read the NTSB's version of these segments, but the Safety Board appeared to only be in a support role for this investigation, and their report in this instance is actually a Marine Accident Brief, or MAB, versus their more comprehensive versions like we've used in the past, known as Marine Accident Reports, or MAR. As for the Coast Guard reports, they're given what's known as a Missile Activity Number. This acronym refers to the Coast Guard's Marine Information for Safety and Law Enforcement database. So, just keep in mind, the Coast Guard findings and lessons learned tend to be formatted quite differently, we'll say, and the Coast Guard can sometimes be a bit less diplomatic in their wording, for better or worse. Combine that with this report being heavily redacted, adding to its complexity. Just another peek into the creation process of breaking these reports down for presentation, more or less. From the U.S. Coast Guard, the causal factors that led to this casualty are as follows. Personnel. The inability and failure of HMS Bounty Organization to provide effective oversight and operating restrictions for their vessel and personnel. The failure of HMS Bounty Organization and the captain to effectively evaluate and determine if prevailing and forecasted weather conditions were favorable for sailing. The failure of HMS Bounty Organization and the captain to appropriately evaluate the vessel's material condition and suitability for sailing in the forecasted weather conditions, given what they both knew about the condition of the vessel's structure and the lack of testing to ensure all bilge systems were fully functional and up to the task of performing to design parameters. The captain was a mariner that had the respect of his crew, industry peers, shipyard personnel, and company management. From all reports, he had tremendous skill as the Bounty's master and knew her better than anyone. That he chose to embark on this voyage knowing of the vessel's defects, the magnitude of the storm, and the experience level of his short-handed crew is unconscionable. It seemed that he had supreme confidence in himself and Bounty. It can only be surmised that this confidence kept him from recognizing the very real dangers his decision imposed on the ship and crew. The chief mate approached him in New London to discuss other options, but he did not want to take counsel. He was compelled largely by the chief mate to hold a meeting with the crew to address their concerns and convince them he and the vessel were capable of the trip, and that leaving port was a way to protect the vessel. The crew chose to stay on board because they trusted his experience, where they felt he would have gone anyway, and that would have left the ship even more short-handed. Every tall ship captain interviewed for this investigation indicated disbelief over the actions of the captain, and stated they never would have left port, or they would have sought a safe berth in sufficient time. Practically every vessel in the Atlantic chose to either tie up or run from Hurricane Sandy. The captain decided to notify the Coast Guard and HMS Bounty Organization regarding their distress much too late. When asked by the chief mate to call the Coast Guard, he refused, stating that they would be better off working on the pumps. His decision smacked of pride and was illogical, given the danger they were in. He should have made calls for assistance on Saturday, October 27th, at the first indication that the electric bilge pumps were not keeping up with the water ingress. This would have given them some opportunity to come up with an alternate plan or better their chances to receive assistance. That crew member with little or no sea experience was hired as the engineer for Bounty, even though an engineer is not required due to its operation as a recreational vessel. That being said, he did not have sufficient experience with vessel systems to adequately perform his duties. He also was not given appropriate time or orientation to the vessel. Additionally, any effectiveness he would have provided was diminished by his injuries and extreme seasickness, which began to be apparent on or about October 27th. Bounty sailed from New London with less than a full complement of crew. Surviving crew members testified that, from the point of departure, each crew member was doing several jobs at once. They had their normal duties, but were also busy preparing the vessel for rough seas. When the sea started to get rough, they were forced to have 2 people on the helm and have someone constantly stand by the bilge pumps. As the voyage progressed, the number of effective crew became less and less due to injury, seasickness, and fatigue. The crew that sailed with Bounty from New London had limited sailing experience and were not properly trained in several vital areas. The crew had not done a fire or abandoned ship drill in over 2 months, and the cook and engineer had never been involved in one. No one had training on how to use the hydraulic bilge pumps or the gasoline-powered pump. This is despite the fact that they knew they were sailing into a hurricane, and Bounty had a history of taking on water, more so in a heavy seaway. Equipment. The port generator and main diesel engine shut down due to lack of fuel during the rough weather. This reduced the vessel's speed, maneuverability, and ability to dewater the vessel. There was no way to accurately gauge the port day tank level due to a broken sight glass. Failure to notice the broken sight glass by the crew during boat checks likely contributed to the port day tank running out of fuel, and therefore the loss of the port main engine and port generator. The effectiveness of the electric bilge pumps was in question from the time the vessel left Boothbay, Maine. Crew reported that they did not think the system was pumping water with the same efficiency, and they were having trouble keeping the pumps primed. They were never able to determine why the pumps were not working correctly. The pumps were likely clogged with debris. The portable hydraulic pump was initially inoperable due to insufficient maintenance. Once it was finally engaged, its effectiveness was limited because it was continually clogged with debris in the bilges. The fixed or stationary hydraulic bilge pump was inoperable. No crew could provide any information on when it was last operated or tested. The fixed pump was also not optimally primed and configured to maximize the pumping capacity. The portable gasoline-powered pump was inoperable, but would have been of little value due to the insufficient capabilities of the pump, as well as the emission of dangerous fumes when operated inside the vessel. The Bounty single sideband radio and SAT-C phone were not operational when the decision was made to request assistance. As they were not tested prior to departure from Boothbay or New London, it is not known how long they were not functional. The hull. The age of the vessel's main structural members, presence of rot, and use of materials not generally used or designed for the marine environment all likely contributed to the vessel taking on water in multiple locations, leading to the progressive flooding, but the age of the vessel is the main contributor. Under normal operating conditions, both underway and at the pier, Bounty relied on her bilge pumps to maintain buoyancy due to the continuous ingress of water through the hull planking. In a heavy seaway, the frequency and duration of bilge pump runtime increased because of the proportional increase in water ingress as a result of the hull working. All crew testified to this fact, and Bounty had a history of near misses related to flooding. Bounty taking on water was apparently an occurrence that was accepted as the norm for wooden vessels. While it is not unusual for wooden hull vessels to make more water in a seaway, a vessel relying primarily on bilge pumps to stay afloat is a sign of more serious defects within the hull structure. Had the vessel been sufficiently watertight by design or retrofit, it may have survived. The historically accurate, yet obsolete arrangement of a tween deck with transverse bulkheads that are not watertight to the weather deck impacted the vessel's inherent survivability, especially once flooding was uncontrolled. Had the vessel met the watertight integrity standards detailed by American Bureau of Shipping load line surveys, the ingress of water may have been at a rate where the installed dewatering systems may have been adequate for the weather and sea conditions leading up to the casualty. In the maritime world, the term casualty is often employed, but carries a different meaning than what you might think. From the Coast Guard's definition of marine casualty, an accident that occurs on navigable waters of the United States, its territories, or possessions. The term includes any event or sequence of events that results in death or serious injury, loss of a person from a ship, loss, presumed loss, or abandonment of a ship, material damage to a ship, any fall overboard, injury, or loss of life of any person, grounding, stranding, foundering, flooding, collision, elision, explosion, fire, reduction or loss of a vessel's electrical power, propulsion, or steering capabilities, failures or occurrence that impair any aspect of a vessel's operation, components, or cargo. Another one of those frequently used maritime terms that might throw some people off a bit upon hearing it for the first time. We will be using some of these terms more often on the channel. The Coast Guard's conclusions continued. Safety standards. The Bounty's only written safety doctrine was the HMS Bounty Crew Manual. There was no direction or input by the HMS Bounty organization, which meant that the creation, implementation, and execution of safety management on board were left solely to the captain and his crew. With no oversight from the owner or independent outside source, the captain instituted a safety culture on the vessel with insufficient standards, especially in the area of voyage planning and emergency operations. During this voyage, the Bounty was operating as a recreational vessel and thus was not subject to the more stringent manning requirements for commercial vessels, load line requirements, and immediate marine casualty reporting requirements. The crew members adopted safety practices with the use of their life-saving equipment that compromised the effectiveness of the gear. The addition of personal flotation jackets and climbing harnesses on top of survival suits did not increase the survival suit's effectiveness. Instead, the additional equipment became a hazard for catching in the rigging, causing several crew members to be pulled underwater and nearly drowned. Abandon and rescue. The leading cause that contributed to the loss of the captain at sea and the death of the deckhand was the captain's decision to order the crew to abandon much too late. However, under the unique circumstances of the approaching storm center, even if the order had been given earlier, there is no guarantee that assistance would have arrived or either of them would have survived. It was fortunate that the captain recognized that the water reaching the 'tween deck was a critical moment, and he ordered the crew to evacuate to the weather deck. However, testimony from the chief mate indicates that the captain believed the vessel was going to simply fill up and settle down into the water, and that the captain believed the vessel was incapable of sinking. The chief mate tried to impress upon the captain moments before the capsizing that they needed to abandon ship, but the captain refused until it was much too late. He failed to recognize the vessel's rolling in the heavy seas was producing a powerful free surface effect on the 'tween decks that, when combined with the vessel's low freeboard, expedited the vessel heeling over. When the vessel laid over, the crew was forced into the water in a disorganized fashion, rather than abandoning as part of a planned and coordinated evolution. The violent rolling continued and caused the masts and rigging to slam up and down, injuring several of the crew. Any chance of an organized departure was lost, and it was every person for themselves. There was no opportunity to make sure that injured crew members were assisted, and the fatigued state of the crew hampered their ability to enter the life rafts. It is recognized that abandoning ship into the life rafts presents a challenge, even in the best of sea conditions, much less in the existing weather conditions, which proved to be extremely difficult. The fact that the crew had not drilled in months, some never, no doubt complicated matters greatly. There is substantial evidence that HMS Bounty Organization LLC and the captain of the Bounty, holder of an MMC or Merchant Mariner credential, through their actions or inactions, committed acts of negligence that contributed to the cause of this casualty and the death of one person, as well as the captain's own presumed death. There is no evidence that the use of dangerous drugs or alcohol contributed to this casualty, because drug testing was not conducted. There is substantial evidence that work-rest-related issues contributed to this casualty. The crew was suffering from fatigue, which was born out of a lack of sleep, being seasick, and from the physical exertion of fighting to save the vessel while in extreme weather conditions for over 24 hours. Environment. The weather was clearly a factor from the beginning of the voyage, although the conditions related to Hurricane Sandy didn't directly affect the vessel until Saturday, October 27th. The crew was stowing gear and preparing the vessel for heavy weather from the time they departed New London. Once the conditions began to worsen, increasing seas accelerated the rate the Bounty was making water. The increasing winds blew out multiple sails. The impact of the environmental conditions was also detrimental to the crew. The increasing sea state caused many of the crew members to become seasick. The conditions also made it difficult to get adequate sleep, not only because of the rough seas, but because the crew sleeping quarters became saturated with water that leaked through the deck. As the voyage progressed and conditions worsened, moving about the vessel became increasingly difficult, and 3 crew members were injured as a result of falls, including the captain. As the vessel foundered and the decision was made to abandon ship, the environmental conditions impacted the crew's ability to communicate with the U.S. Coast Guard, any other nearby vessels, as well as each other on deck. Environmental conditions also made preparations to abandon ship, including donning survival suits, as well as life jackets and climbing harnesses, extremely difficult. Once the crew had abandoned, the heavy weather conditions made it exceedingly difficult to get into the inflatable life rafts. Crew members testified that entering the life raft took at least 1 hour once they reached the raft. Wind and seas caused one of the life rafts to flip during the rescue. When the captain finally authorized the chief mate to call for assistance on the night of October 28th, there had already been 3 crew injured, including himself, loss of the port main engine and port generator, problems with the starboard generator, blown out sails and damaged rigging, and flooding that had several feet of water in the bilges. With the clarity of post-casualty analysis, looking at the timeline of continued difficulties aboard Bounty starting on Saturday, October 27th, and the continued proximity of the approaching storm center, the best time to have made the first call for assistance, for pumps at least, would have been on Saturday when the captain attempted to engage the hydraulic pumps, which were seen as emergency pumps. That said, based on his testimony, his realization that the hydraulic pump did not work sometime the evening of October 27th may simply have been too late, even if he had given the order right then to make the distress call. End quote. From the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the sinking of Tall Ship Bounty was the captain's reckless decision to sail the vessel into the well-forecasted path of Hurricane Sandy, which subjected the aging vessel and the inexperienced crew to conditions from which the vessel could not recover. Contributing to the sinking was the lack of effective safety oversight by the vessel organization. The Coast Guard also stated the following, which I find quite impactful. The captain chose to steer towards Hurricane Sandy at a near constant bearing and decreasing range with no compelling reason to do so. His actions conflicted with all known maritime methodologies for storm avoidance. It can only be concluded that he was not trying to avoid it at all. He purposefully placed his crew and his vessel into extremely dangerous conditions. The captain's actions and/or inactions in this regard constitutes negligence. From the Coast Guard's recommendations, to the Commandant of the Coast Guard, review the policy for attraction vessels and evaluate their regulatory status when traveling from port to port, and determine whether the classification of any of these vessels as recreational is appropriate. Review the Officer's Competency Certificates Convention and the manning regulations to determine if the term uninspected vessel is intended to exclude recreational vessels from the requirement for licensed mates and engineers for documented self-propelled seagoing vessels over 200 gross tons. Establish policy or provide guidance to the officer in charge of marine inspections on the protocol, scope, limits, and/or responsibilities and liabilities of conducting inspection-type activities on uninspected or recreational vessels. Revise Navigation and Inspection Circular 7-94, Guidance on the Passenger Vessel Safety Act of 1993, and address the use of volunteers on attraction and sail training vessels while underway. To the HMS Bounty Organization, establish organizational policy that defines how the organization manages risk, establishes effective communication throughout the organization, establishes a process for identifying and correcting defects, sets clear safety and environmental standards, and implements a continual improvement process. Establish a policy that dictates vessel operational parameters based on weather, sea state, or destination, and it requires consensus between qualified persons afloat and ashore. Go, no-go decisions should be based on consideration of vital system functionality, such as bilge systems, crew strength, and fatigue. Establish organizational policy and requirements for the hiring of a professional engineer, and provide him or her clear task direction on expected duties and performance. If HMS Bounty Organization representatives or the captain had exercised the proper responsibility, judgment, and prudence expected of a professional maritime company or a merchant mariner, this casualty would have been prevented. HMS Bounty Organization only operated one vessel, and it is not known if they plan to ever operate a vessel again. It can be argued that the simple lessons to be learned from this investigation is that masters in command of a vessel and crew must have a profound respect for the sea and the forces of nature, and the value of a vessel pales in comparison to that of a human life. However, this casualty did provide insight to policy gaps and areas where safety recommendations would be useful as lessons learned. Recommendations to HMS Bounty Organization are done so in the hopes that the Tall Ships America fleet or similar entities will heed them. And in their report, the name is now redacted, but I found this interesting, quote, "The redacted party is commended for coming forward regarding the condition of Bounty's hull. Multiple interviews were conducted with the Bounty Organization, the crew, and shipyard personnel, and no one acknowledged the decay until he did." And once again, thanks to Mike Brady, the legend over at Oceanliner Designs, for such an incredible collab. And if you want to learn more of the history, the mutiny, and everything that happened before what we're considering my episode 2 of the series, The Loss of Tall Ship Bounty, I'll have links to Oceanliner Designs video in the description and pinned comment. The family of that lost deckhand sued the vessel's owners, HMS Bounty Organization, for what some sources report as being $90 million initially, which was eventually settled outside of court for an undisclosed amount. The vessel's insurance company brought a reported $5.1 million lawsuit, citing the owners misrepresented the vessel's unseaworthy condition and reckless decision to sail into Hurricane Sandy. It's reported this lawsuit was dismissed on grounds that the insurance company's claim, quote, failed on its merits, but that the vessel owner's counterclaim in response was also dismissed by the court. From the U.S. Coast Guard. The men and women from U.S. Coast Guard Sector North Carolina, Air Station Elizabeth City, Coast Guard Cutter Elm, and the 5th District should be commended for their efforts during the Bounty search and rescue efforts from October 29 to November 1st. Their actions went above and beyond the call of duty. Although it was not required by the Bounty Organization, 10 out of 16 of the Bounty crew had attended BST, a seafarer's 5-day, 40-hour basic safety training course. All of those that attended said what they learned had helped them during the casualty. Thanks so much for watching. As always, our viewers, supporters, and everyone that's into brick and mortar are what make this possible. Without you, this channel would simply not exist. And a special thanks to our top tier Patreon supporters: Trayson, Steve, Skip N, Rusty G, Robert G, Peyton, Paul Z, P. Rush, Paul Rohrbaugh, Nick C, Nathan M, Megan T, Maximum Hats, Mark W, Manuel M, Lisa J, Kyle W, Justin S, Joshua S, James L, Hayden Taylor, Emily, Drew R, David M, Christian T, Carolyn, Broken Spectrum, Brendan C, Bonesaw, Les Malls, Andrew M, Andrew F, Alex S, Alex N, and Aaron M. And don't forget, your safety matters.